Burn. Book 2 in the Crash and Burn Duet. Written by Grahame Clare. Narrated by Maxine Mitchell and Joe Arden.
Chapter 1. Teague. "Pepper is missing." The old woman's panicked voice barreled down the phone line. "Missing?" I sounded groggy, like she'd spoken a foreign language. I'd been fired hours earlier, and apparently my brain was already sluggish at responding to emergencies. "Did I stutter?" Miss Adeline snapped. "She was gone a while, so I went downstairs to check on her." I waited impatiently for her to finish the thought. Instead, all I got was silence and a whole lot of tension, even though we weren't in the same location. "How do you know she's not walking other dogs?" I had no idea what time it was. I'd been sitting in the same spot for hours. "Because Sadie, Muffy, and Ash came back without her." The glass of water I held slipped from my hands. It shattered on Lincoln's kitchen's stone floor. Her words were a swift kick in the stomach, and in my mind, which shifted into high gear. I pushed out of the chair, grabbed my keys, and jogged to the elevator. "I'm on my way." My hand shook as I pressed the call button. "Where are you, Pepper? Please be okay." I checked the time as I stepped into the elevator. Almost midnight. I despised that she had to be out so late. It wasn't safe, and even though I'd asked her, more like demanded, to not walk the dogs at an ungodly hour, she'd put me in my place. I should have been there. Instead, after I'd been fired, I'd wandered around the city, furious. I'd ignored my phone all day, needing to be alone while I sorted out what my next move would be. The one person I'd wanted to go to, I hadn't, because I didn't want to dump more problems on her. She already had enough. But if I had, maybe she wouldn't be missing right now. Please be okay. Please be okay. The thought replayed over and over in my head as I jumped in my truck, rushed through red lights, swerved around the few cars in my way. When I was a few blocks out from Grey Paws, my body tightened on high alert. I swung my eyes from side to side, searching every dark corner and alleyway. Honk! Headlights blinded me, and I jerked the wheel to get the truck back into my lane. Shit! Come on, Pepper. Desperation to find her pricked every part of me. Anger bubbled up as I passed the black hole that used to be her park. I crept forward, shining my lights on the destruction. It was impossible to see anything but charred heaps of what used to be. The barrels were gone, most likely in evidence at the police station. I banged the steering wheel with my fist. Damn it! She's fine. She's just... I didn't know where she was, and my hollow reassurances to myself did nothing to calm my racing heart. A figure lay on the ground near what was left on the bench we'd sat on only a few days ago. I slammed on the brakes and jumped out of the truck. Ding, ding, ding. The bell sounded from the cab where I'd left the door open and the truck running. I ignored it and sprinted ahead. Pepper! I rolled over the heap and winced. A dirty, bearded face greeted me. Eyes that looked lost blinked open. I let out a long sigh and patted the man's arm. "I'll get you some help, buddy." "Why'd you wake me up?" he slurred grumpily. "I was looking for someone." I perked up. It was a long shot, but worth asking. "Have you seen a woman?" Crap, I had no idea what she was wearing. A loud snore came from the ground. He'd passed out again. I texted a friend who worked at a homeless shelter to get some help for the man and ran back to my truck. I scoured the surrounding blocks of the shelter a few times, but came up empty. I wheeled to a stop in the alley behind Grey Paws. Please let her be back. Bang, bang, bang. My fist hurt from pounding on the door so hard. Woof, woof, woof. A frenzy of barking started from inside. Impatiently, I waited for Miss Adeline to answer. I glanced up and down the alley, hoping to see Pepper in her overalls with a messy ponytail and that beautiful face. I was still surprised at how quickly she'd grown to mean something to me. The door creaked open. The barking grew louder. Miss Adeline's sharp eye peered at me through the crack. "Is she back?" I asked in lieu of a greeting. She held the dogs while I shimmied inside. Ash rocketed toward me. I knelt. She burrowed between my legs and nestled against me. I rubbed down her sides, already comforted just being near her. "She'll be back." Miss Adeline's voice lacked the usual confidence and spark. I prayed with all my might she was right. Walk me through what happened. I needed to hear it again, to see if there was anything we'd missed. She told me she was going to walk a few of the dogs. I told her to take her phone and be careful. I don't even know what time it was. She shook her head and looked down at her feet. She has her phone? Hope rushed through me like a tsunami. I've called it 1,000,000 times. Miss Adeline waved her cell phone. No answer. Any chance you have tracking enabled for each other? She brightened, then made an annoyed face. She made me put that on there in case anything happened, because I'm an old person. I bit my lip to keep from laughing. She said I could track her too when I put up a fuss, but I've never done that. Is there no privacy in this world anymore? She continued on with a bit of her snark back, though it seemed as if she was attempting to cover up her worry. May I see your phone? I held out my hand, and she readily dropped her cell into my palm. After a few swipes and clicks, I had the tracking app open. The blue dot representing Pepper flashed. I zoomed in on the map. She's at the park. Chapter 2. Teague. Adrenaline fueled, I raced back to the park. I'd just left there minutes ago. There'd been no sign of Pepper, but one thing I'd learned as a firefighter was that things could change in an instant. Miss Adeline stayed behind with the dogs in case Pepper called the rescue or showed back up. With her phone glued to my hand, I kept one eye on the blue dot and one on the street. It hadn't moved, but these things weren't always completely accurate. I was just grateful for any kind of clue so we could be doing something instead of sitting around worrying. I stopped the truck in almost the exact same spot as I had earlier. The man who'd been there was gone. I hoped he'd made it to the shelter, but was pretty sure there hadn't been time for that. Pepper! Why hadn't I called for her before? Pepper! The only response was the echo of my voice in the cold night. I searched the area frantically. There was no sign of her or her phone. Her phone. I stilled and dialed. It rang on my end. I craned my neck and listened carefully for a ringtone. Ring. I ran toward the sound on the edge of the park. The lit screen glowed up ahead. Her cracked phone danced across the sidewalk. I swiped it off the ground and whirled around, frantically searching for her. Pepper! I looked under charred bushes nearby. Maybe she'd fallen and hit her head. I checked a bench a few yards away, behind a dumpster. I swallowed hard as I lifted the lid to the dumpster. I shined a light inside. Just garbage, thank God. Damn it! I threw my hands up. Anything could have happened. My mind went to the worst-case scenario and instinct backed it up. I'd buy she simply dropped her phone if the dogs hadn't showed back up to the rescue without her. That was the biggest troubling sign. It pointed to something sinister, something I didn't want to think about. Bzz, bzz, bzz. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I yanked it out, but deflated when Lincoln's name flashed on the screen. Where are you? We just got home and you're not here. I plowed a hand through my hair. Pepper's missing. I didn't want to say the words out loud. The more I spoke them, the truer they became. What? I'm near Gray Paws looking for her. I peered into the darkness and held Pepper's phone like it was a lifeline. We're on our way. Before I could protest, he hung up. Should we call the police? Bo wrapped her hands around a mug of tea and propped herself against the reception desk. It won't matter. She hasn't been missing long enough. I paced in front of the windows, back and forth, almost wearing a hole in the flooring. Anyone could have grabbed her. Miss Adeline stared at her lap. How are we so sure someone took her? Lincoln asked, ever the voice of reason. Because she wouldn't have let go of those dogs for anything, she snapped, and her cell phone was on the ground. I don't think she threw it there and decided to run away. Her shoulders slumped as she sagged farther down in the chair. Bo placed a hand on her arm in comfort. This might be an odd question, but is there someone who might have it out for either of you, or the rescue? The old woman cut her eyes to my sister. Let's see. Our latest list of enemies could be the track in Jersey we just took all their dogs from, or maybe that horrible inspector who's trying to shut us down, but it could have been some random crazy person. Has anything like this ever happened before? Lincoln asked. She waved her hand. We've had the occasional threats, but mostly it's been all bark and no bite, until recently. Until I came into the picture. That guy at the track was a possibility, and he would have been angry whether I was around or not. But the inspector? The guy who made them scramble to find another place for over half their dogs? That one was on me. Because of... Where's Dad? I froze and stared at my brother. He stared back, his expression unreadable. He wouldn't be stupid enough to kidnap Pepper. How could Lincoln take up for him, knowing what a monster he was, knowing what he'd done to Pepper and Miss Adeline? He was in his office when we left, Bo said, almost apologetic. You don't think... I absolutely think he's capable of this. And if anything happened to Pepper because of him, I'd never forgive myself. What good does it do for him to take Pepper? And we don't even know for sure that she was taken. Are you kidding me right now? I threw my hands up. I want to find Pepper too, but we need to think clearly. Easy for him to say. I could barely think at all. My mind was all tangled up in possibilities and worst-case scenarios. Now that the seed had been planted, my father was at the center of every single one of those thoughts. Call him. I pointed at my brother. He pulled out his phone and dialed without hesitation. My emotions were mixing up my ability to reason clearly. Lincoln was on my side. Always. He simply didn't jump to conclusions as he puzzled things out. He held the device up to his ear. We waited. And waited. And waited. He's not answering.
Chapter 3. Pepper.
Well. She's awake?
The voice sounded far off in the distance. I blinked my eyes open and found I was still shrouded in darkness. Are the dogs okay? For a moment, I listened. No dogs barking. No hushed whispers. No footsteps. Only silence. Please let them be safe. I prayed Muffy, Sadie, and Ash had escaped unharmed and made it to safety. The dark was disorienting. I had no concept of time and very little of the space surrounding me. My hands were on my lap. I moved them, expecting resistance, yet finding none. I stretched my legs and found the same. I wasn't restrained. With my newfound freedom, sort of, I tugged on whatever was over my head. Dim light blinded me. I squinted, impatiently waiting for my eyes to adjust. The floor was concrete and cracked. I was seated in a metal chair. It was impossible to see beyond the circle of light illuminating the immediate area surrounding me. Click, click, click. Footsteps approached. Dress shoes with tassels were visible first. Then the suit pants and a long cashmere coat. And the face that was so familiar, yet a stranger. I was stunned once again how on one man these features meant protection and security, while on the other they were terrifying.
I don't like that it's come to this.
I snorted. Samuel Hollingsworth seemed to thrive on intimidation.
Let's not bother with innuendo.
I remained silent as he stepped closer. One half of his face was bathed in light, the other in the dark.
You're in a unique position, Pepper.
Something about the way he said my name sent a chill skittering down my spine.
You alone hold the power to get me what I want.
He walked a slow circle around me. I sat statue still, hoping I'd wake up and this would all be a nightmare.
But I, too, hold the power to let you keep what you want.
Thump, thump, thump. My heart beat so loudly in my ears I could hardly hear his voice. I had zero doubt he'd take away everything I loved without a second thought. He'd already proven that, considering over half my dogs weren't at the rescue anymore. He stopped in front of me and looked down. He tilted his head, those sinister eyes inscrutable.
Interesting, you haven't asked me what I want, he mused, almost as if he were curious as to why.
I'm pretty sure you're going to tell me. Otherwise this whole charade would be pointless. He glared, and I tried not to shrink into the chair. And then he laughed. The sound vibrated and echoed throughout the cavern. He shook his finger at me.
I see why he's drawn to you. His mother had that same spirit.
Then he clamped his mouth shut as if he'd spoken out of turn. Or did the mention of his dead wife affect him in the same way it did Teague? It seemed impossible this man was capable of any sort of feeling, but even monsters could be wounded, couldn't they?
You're going to convince my son to come work for me.
If you changed your tone, you probably wouldn't need me to do that. Pepper. I excelled at keeping my mouth closed. My fingers trembled despite sitting on them, yet I appeared determined to piss this man off.
And when you do, he continued, as if I hadn't spoken, I'm going to let you keep your little mutt house.
The vision of him kicking Muffy blasted into my brain. How dare he treat my dogs that way, let alone speak of them like that? Teague is his own man, not to mention he already has a job. I should be agreeing to whatever his father wanted so I could keep Grey Paws and move on with my life. But I didn't trust him.
I am not a man you want to toy with.
I'm aware of that, but I'm afraid you think I hold some power that I don't. Why am I still sitting here? Why didn't he tie me down? He went to the trouble of kidnapping me, yet didn't seem to be holding me prisoner. He's a master of mind games.
For your sake, you should hope you hold that power. If you don't, I have no reason to show mercy.
Fear and anger propelled me to my feet. I have nothing to do with your family drama. Leave mine out of it. I stormed in the opposite direction of where he stood, hoping there was a door.
Oh, my dear, how wrong you are.
His voice stopped me when I'd reached the shadows.
Did Miss Adeline tell you about her recent visit to her physician?
What visit?
I didn't think so. Wouldn't it be a shame? Well, you should probably discuss it with her.
I couldn't move. Was he lying? Or worse, was he telling the truth?
And don't think you fooled anyone regarding the whereabouts of those other mutts. I have to hand it to you, Daniel Elliot isn't someone I want to cross, but rules are rules. I hear the city shelter is intensely overpopulated. How many animals do they exterminate a day?
A violent trembling rattled my core. Whether or not he was being honest about Miss Adeline didn't matter. I understood every unspoken syllable. He'd hurt my family. He'd hurt my dogs. He'd hurt my friends. And he'd do God knew what to Teague. This man redefined the word manipulation.
And Pepper?
I closed my eyes. This couldn't be happening.
You will make sure my son is my employee within 24 hours. It's mind-boggling how many accidents happen these days. To the elderly, to animals. Safety is such an illusion.
Chapter 4. Pepper. Brooklyn. He'd taken me to Brooklyn with no money or phone to get back to Grey Paws. It was late. I had no idea where a subway station might be, and there wasn't a cab in sight. 24 hours. I had 24 hours to convince Teague to go to work for his family business, or I would lose everything. And I couldn't do either. How was I supposed to tell him the position his father had put us in? He'd quit the job he loved for me and the dogs. Everything he'd done proved he'd make the sacrifice. I couldn't let him be miserable for us. But if he didn't, where did that leave Miss Adeline and me and Grey Paws? Teague's father had already divided us. He took me tonight. What else was he capable of? And why? What wouldn't he stop at? What accidents? Crap. You could run. I leaned against a light pole. For 12 years I'd had a home. Could I pack up the dogs and Miss Adeline and find somewhere to start over? I kicked at the pole. Why should we be the ones to give up everything? We'd worked hard to build the happy life we had, and we were happy. Of course, we could have that anywhere, but we had it here. I just wasn't sure how to keep it. I pushed forward with determined steps. The last time I'd run, it had been easy. I'd been embarrassed, humiliated, ashamed, and it wasn't hard to hide from that. In fact, disappearing had been easy, but cowardly. Leaving everything hadn't mattered because I'd had nothing left. Now, there was so much to lose. And what guarantee did we have that Teague's father would keep his end of the deal? None. What would be the next hoop to jump through? Not that I'd dealt with anyone like that man, but for people like him, there was never enough. We'd just keep giving and giving until there was nothing left. We need a miracle. I spoke softly to the sky, hoping someone or something would hear me. I'd been saved before by Miss Adeline. Was I out of favors, or did I have another hand to play? A dull throb pulsed between my temples. Whatever they'd given me to knock me out had almost completely worn off. I had no idea if I'd been gone for hours or days, but I needed to be home, to see Miss Adeline, the dogs, Teague. Guilt that he was in this horrible position washed over me. Why wouldn't his father just let him live his life? Up ahead, a staircase leading down to the underbelly of the city appeared. I quickened my steps in hope. The subway. I jogged down the steps. The station was deserted, so I hopped over the turnstile and promised myself I'd pay back the fare later. I bolted from the 18th Street station. The sky was still pitch black, save a few clouds and stars. Relief coursed through me at being back in a familiar space. I raced down the sidewalk as fast as my feet would carry me. Almost there. Almost there. I rounded the corner and flew toward safety, toward home. As I grew closer, I noticed that all the lights were on. A figure moved inside, and then paws landed on the window. The bark I loved so very much was such a sweet sound. I'd made it. Home.
Chapter 5. Teague. Woof, woof, woof. Sadie jumped, placing her big paws on the window. She threw her head back and barked. "It's not time yet," Miss Adeline said. That dog had a built-in clock for mealtime. I checked my watch. A little after 5. It would be daylight soon, and there was still no sign of Pepper. Sadie dug at the glass. Her nails slipped on the surface, and her barking grew more intense. I moved beside her and glanced out the window. "What's got you so stirred up?" I touched her head, though that did nothing to calm her. I squinted. Something moved outside. I blinked, uncertain if I was just seeing what I wanted to see. The barking faded to the background. I touched the window. The shadow drew closer. It looked to be the right height. When it almost reached the door, I threw it open. "Pepper!" She rushed inside, but I caught her fearful look over her shoulder before the door closed. What had happened to her? Sadie barreled toward her, almost knocking her down. The dog whimpered and squealed in a way I'd never heard from her before. Pepper knelt. Sadie attacked her with kisses, and then she was surrounded by the other dogs, who all wagged their tails and swiped at her face with their big tongues. Pepper laughed and petted whatever wiggling greyhound body she could reach. I tried to see if she was hurt. By all appearances, she seemed okay. Miss Adeline stood and ambled to the giant pile. Pepper stood and threw her arms around the old woman. They hugged for a long time with eyes closed. When they finally broke apart, Miss Adeline held her at arm's length. "I'm okay," Pepper whispered. "Looks like they are too." She pointed at the dogs with her chin. "Don't ever scare me like that again." Miss Adeline shook Pepper. "I don't plan to." Bo glided over, apparently giving them all the time together she could stand. She yanked Pepper in for a hug. "What happened?" "Who did this?" Lincoln asked. She'd yet to look at me. I wanted to take her in my arms, feel that she was safe and here, despite that I could see she was. There seemed to be a chasm between us, one that was palpable, one that I wanted to erase. "Are you hurt?" I asked hoarsely. She shook her head, but still she refused to look in my direction. "What happened?" Bo asked again, this time more gently and less urgent. Pepper squeezed Miss Adeline's hands. "How did you find them?" Naturally, her first concern was the dogs. It always was. That was one of the reasons I admired her so much. "They showed up back here. Without you," Miss Adeline spoke quietly. There was almost a silent question at the end of her statement, the one Bo had already asked twice. "They tried." Pepper's voice caught, like she didn't want to think about what had led us to this point. "Should we call the authorities?" Lincoln asked, phone in hand at the ready. "No," she answered quickly. She stooped once more to pet Sadie, her comfort crutch. "I appreciate all of you being here, but I'm exhausted." "Of course you are," Miss Adeline said before any of us could protest. Part of me wanted Pepper to get the rest and recovery she needed. The other part was desperate for answers. I glanced at Lincoln, who shook his head. "Don't push it." He didn't have to say it. I understood completely. "Can I make you some tea?" Bo asked. She didn't get the message to let Pepper be. "No, thank you, though. All of you." Her slight smile was tired but genuine. "I'll walk you up." Finally, her eyes met mine. "I'm good." I didn't want to let her out of my sight. "I'm not." She released a long breath of acceptance and moved toward the stairs. "Rest well. We'll be here when you need us," Bo called. Pepper turned and nodded. We were quiet as we trudged up the steps. Sadie, Muffy, and Ash were right with us, their nails clicking on the hardwood. I followed her wordlessly through the apartment. She shrugged off her coat and laid it over a kitchen chair. Her overalls had a dirt streak down the leg. Not one caused by a dog paw. Her hair was a mess, with strands of it loose from what was left of her ponytail. She looked the same, if not a little worse for the wear, but she looked different. All the things I adored about her were in place, yet I felt the invisible barrier between us. "They can be a lot," I said when we reached her room. She sat on the edge of the bed and tugged off her boots. They landed with a thud a few feet away. Sadie jumped up and made herself at home on the pillows. Her watchful gaze was